How the narcissist pollutes work culture. Hello, I'm HG Tudor. I'm often asked by people, HG, can an organisation or a company be narcissistic? Well, of course, an organisation or a company isn't a human being, it's an entity. In some instances, it has its own separate legal entity, an incorporated entity, a limited entity, a GmbH or an AS, a PLC, a limited liability partnership. Therefore, an organisation of itself cannot be narcissistic because it doesn't have a personality. But what it does have is a culture. And that culture is something that can be one where it's toxic, one where it's a supportive, encouraging culture. For example, comparably, ascertained that the top 10 companies in terms of culture, companies which were voted for as having very good cultures by their own employees, included Microsoft. It's described as having smart people, highly collaborative, an excellent and caring culture. It's an exciting time to be part of Microsoft and to make a big impact for people and organisations throughout the world. Number 2 was Workday. The culture at Workday is really our secret sauce. A lot of great people who want to see others succeed and provide support to each other. Number 3, Chegg. There's a strong push for employee equity across the company and around the world, mission-driven through and through. Number 4, Ring Central. Ring Central has clear company goals and a metric-driven direction. I appreciate their investment in company culture. They celebrate many different cultural events and are always on top of addressing world issues. Number 5, HubSpot. I have been with HubSpot for a few years at this point. Hands down, this is the best company I've ever been a part of, and probably one of the best companies out there in the world. A phenomenal place overall with the culture, the people, the product, fantastic place. Number 6, Concentrix. At Concentrix, we have an inclusive culture and promote diversity. Our culture statements are the guiding principles of our employees around the world. Number 7, Elsevier. Overall, a global culture with openness, boundarylessness, transparency, learning, opportunities, inclusion, and respect for colleagues. Number 8, LexisNexis. Work culture is excellent at LexisNexis. The leadership team is open to hear newer ideas from the engineers and leads and supports a strong culture of diversity and inclusion. Number 9, Globant. Globant's culture embraces diversity and focuses on bringing out the best of every employee. The environment always leads you to be the best version of yourself. And number 10 in this survey, RX. RXPH has a very strong culture of work-life balance and advocating for continuous learning and career growth. This alone makes the experience life-changing. 10 companies there that were all voted as having excellent cultures. But what at the other end of the scale? Well, some of these companies have found themselves with accusations of toxic work cultures. Nike. A sexual harassment and gender discrimination lawsuit against Nike involves more than 5,000 pages of documents and records, including surveys from female employees that detail incidences of sexist behaviour and corporate bullying. The documents became public after a legal challenge by several news organisations to lift a protective order on a lawsuit that could expand the legal action to a class action suit involving about 5,000 workers. X, formerly known as Twitter. Some critics argue that what Musk touches turns toxic. Since he took over a year ago, October, he's been in the headlines nearly daily for his antics, from reports of employees sleeping at the office to massive abrupt layoffs. The toxicity at Twitter, now X, began with an ultimatum from Musk asking employees to commit to extremely hardcore work or leave, and has continued since. Tesla. It's known for its cutting-edge technology, but its workplace culture may well be mired in the past. Last year, a federal court ruled in favor of a former worker, Owen Diaz, to the tune of $137 million because of hostile and racist abuse he endured. Diaz testified that he and other black workers were subjected to racist graffiti and drawings, as well as racial name-calling, and were told to go back to Africa. The award was on top of a $1 million arbitration agreement paid to another former worker because of a racist, hostile work environment, and a class action that claimed unsafe working conditions and a racist culture. In June, another lawsuit came out against Tesla CEO Elon Musk for fostering a toxic work environment in which discrimination and harassment are commonplace. Toy maker Mattel was sued for age discrimination, retaliation, harassment, and wrongful termination. The plaintiff was Bernard Grises, a permatemp, set and scenery builder at Mattel for almost 20 years. He had a good reputation among colleagues, performing outstandingly in substantial responsibilities, and was never disciplined. But he was passed over repeatedly for a permanent role in favour of younger employees. He accused the company of harassing him because of his age, calling him an old man, asking him constantly when he'd retire, and even teasing him by posting hurtful pictures of him around the office. Rio Tinto. A recent audit by multinational mining corporation Rio Tinto uncovered patterns of sexism, sexual harassment and assault, including actual or attempted rape, and widespread bullying among its global workforce. A review said that racism was common across a number of areas, and about half of the company's 47,500 employees in 35 countries had experienced bullying rooted in either sexism or racism. Sony Mamao, a former security analyst for Sony, filed a lawsuit against the tech giant for systemic gender discrimination and wrongful termination. 8 more former and current employees have come forward since, with accusations of sexism against the PlayStation maker. The company devalues women's ideas, makes it difficult for women to get promoted, and discriminates against mothers, they say. They also allege sexual harassment. Activision Blizzard. They're being sued by the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing for fostering a toxic culture within the company. Allegations include bullying, sexual harassment, and racial discrimination. The culture within Activision has been compared to frat house behaviour. Specifically, female team members on the World of Warcraft team allege non-consensual physical contact, unwanted advances, and demeaning comments, including jokes about rape. Walmart has been the subject of plenty of criticism. At one point, it was the focus of about 5,000 employee lawsuits annually, which included allegations of sexual discrimination against women with regard to pay and promotion. Others have said the company forces employees to work off the clock. Glow Networks. They lost the discrimination brought by 10 former employees, resulting in a whopping $70 million payout. The verdict found the company guilty of racial discrimination, including promotion denials, a hostile work environment, and unequal pay. Back in 2012, Goldman Sachs executive Grant Smith penned an essay for the New York Times explaining that he was leaving the company after 12 years because of the toxic culture. Smith, who began working at the company as an intern while completing schooling at Stanford, wrote, "I've worked here long enough to understand the trajectory of its culture, its people, and its identity. And I can honestly say that the environment now is as toxic and destructive as I have ever seen it." The company came under fire where a group of employees put together a presentation detailing work conditions that included working long hours that left them little time to sleep. There were claims of physical abuse and an intense drinking culture that one individual felt was forced upon him, making him feel like he was living in a fraternity. At Apple, a dozen unidentified female employees say they were victims of work atmosphere that allowed jokes about rape and gender stereotyping by male workers who described women as nags. There were reports from 500 more former and current employees of verbal abuse, sexual harassment, and discrimination. The Ellen DeGeneres Show, of course, found itself criticised with one revelation after another about the daytime talk show's culture. The comic, famously known as being kind, certainly did not come off as very kind in statements by employees and others in the industry. In addition to 11 employees speaking out and a black employee alleging racist comments, Hollywood celebrities have come out saying it's an open Hollywood secret that DeGeneres is one of the meanest people in the business. Amazon. Employees there have complained about everything from work stress resulting from high-performance quotas to being subjected to timed bathroom breaks and having to work in social isolation. An investigative report from the Daily Beast in 2019 revealed that 189 emergency calls were made from 46 Amazon warehouses for employee mental health episodes. Employees have described Amazon in the past as a dystopian work environment that is shockingly hostile and destructive to employees' mental health. Just a few examples of organisations alleged to have a toxic work culture. So we've had examples at both ends of the scale. But where does a company's culture come from? Well, effective leadership is one of the greatest fundamentals with regard to creating the type of organisational culture that exists within a company or organisation. A leader can be anyone who has influence or authority, regardless of title, and leaders set the tone for organisational culture. They can reinforce values while simultaneously holding people accountable. This influence over others can be positive or negative, based on the leadership style and execution of strategy. Failing to build a strong culture is viewed as detrimental to employees and the bottom line. Culture is instilled by a leader in a workplace, and where the appropriate culture is put in place, the workforce becomes more engaged. Benefits include higher quality and safety, better work-life balance, excellent customer service, greater retention rates, growing profitability. A positive culture is invariably seen as the foundation of an organisation, with meaningful work, appreciation, well-being, leadership and connection being all aspects which contribute to the appropriate culture. Leadership culture is how leaders interact with one another and their team members. It's the way leaders operate, communicate and make decisions. It's about the everyday working environment, their behaviours, interactions, beliefs and values. Leadership influences the culture, the ways that people are hired, the way that high-performance teams are created, the way that business strategies are executed, the way that there is engagement with their employees creates the appropriate corporate culture. Effective leadership development goes beyond training classes or even determining the right cultural fit when hiring new leaders. It's about a good leader is somebody who cares about and brings out the best in others through coaching, mentoring, and listening. Modern leaders are leaders who mentor and coach rather than micromanage and gatekeep. They advocate for their people and empower them to do great work rather than trying to do it all themselves. They appreciate their employees, provide opportunities, and share success. They're inclusive and build connections. They do this through purpose, accomplishment, and the concept of one another. Leaders have a tremendous impact on company culture. They set the agenda, prioritize work, manage, lead, and delegate. Leaders provide a sense of vision, purpose, mentorship, and inspiration to those that they lead. They need to be a role model. They need to observe for insights, provide an open communication platform, take meaningful action on feedback, empower employees, remind workers that failure isn't fatal, recognize a job that's well done. No doubt, as I've been explaining some of those aspects which are seen as the good aspects of a company culture, you've been thinking to yourself, well, yes, I can understand where that might come from and how a narcissist wouldn't provide it. The leaders create the culture. Who are the leaders in a company that set the culture or within an organisation? It could be, for instance, within a police force in the United Kingdom, the chief constable, the assistant chief constable, senior management. Within a hospital, the chief executive and the board of that hospital. It could be, of course, the founding partner who has created the very company. Relevant board members, the CEO, the CFO, the COO, etc. Senior partners in a law or accountancy firm. In some instances, a sole owner. But these are all the people who are the leaders. And it is their leadership which heavily influences the culture. Those leadership positions, of course, are often occupied by narcissists who are overrepresented amongst the different types of people: normal, empath, narcissistic, and narcissist. And therefore, why is this? Being a leader appeals to narcissists because it naturally allows the pursuit of the prime aims. By being a leader, that provides power. Invariably, the hierarchy allows that leader to impose decisions, to issue instructions, to bark orders. And therefore, having that power as a leader makes it easier for a narcissist to control people around them. Being in a position of leadership creates prominence, and all eyes are on that individual, meaning, therefore, that the individual is in a better position to draw fuel, because he or she is seen by those outside of the organization as the face of that organization. They deal with other leaders. They deal with members of the public. They deal with the press and media. Within the organization, they're visible. They're talked about. They may give speeches. They are seen walking the floor. It also, of course, provides access to lots of character traits within the workforce and, of course, as a leadership, doing deals with other organizations and companies. It provides residual benefits. Invariably, the leaders are the ones who are best remunerated. They can generate a facade of success, a facade of seemingly caring, like Ellen DeGeneres, access to networks. And therefore, being a leader in an organization or company is hugely attractive, either knowingly or unknowingly, to the narcissist with regard to the pursuit of the prime aims. And therefore it is little wonder that so many narcissists clamour for those positions of leadership at a company, as becoming a partner, becoming a board member. Thus, many leaders within organizations are narcissists. And then, with those individuals having got themselves in a position of leadership, they are then able to create the culture. Invariably, certain narcissists, particularly those of a lesser and mid-range persuasion, operate in a manner where they focus on the instant, the now. This means that they show no accountability, that they don't listen to advice, that they are always right, that they bark orders at people. They expect people to do what they want because they are the leader, irrespective of whether what they've suggested is appropriate or helpful. They behave as they see fit because either they own the organization or behave like they do because they're in a leadership position. The assets of the organization belong to them, either actually or in their mind, and they treat them accordingly. People are there simply to do what is required. If you fail, you're the problem, not their leadership. Staff are there to be utilized for the pursuit of fuel, which also means, of course, there is a lack of boundary recognition, resulting in many narcissists engaging in racist, sexist, ableist behaviors towards individuals. That sexual harassment occurs because the relevant narcissist has no emotional empathy for the person that they're dealing with, that doesn't see anything wrong in walking past somebody and slapping them on the bottom or making comments about somebody's breast size. Thus, this individual imposes, through their narcissism, through the sense of entitlement, the lack of emotional empathy, the lack of accountability, their grandiosity, their haughtiness, and their manipulative behaviours, imposes all of that upon a workforce. Invariably, the leader will surround themselves with compliant individuals, their lieutenants, sometimes other narcissists, often narcissistic people or normals, even sometimes empathic people who don't feel able to stand up to this prevailing culture. It isn't just narcissists that set the tone because they alone can't do it. There has to be almost buy-in from the workforce. And there's two forms of buy-in to this kind of toxic culture. There are those that revel in it. These are often normals. They don't really care about the other people that they're dealing with. They're selfish themselves. They're not narcissists. They do have emotional empathy. But their desire to get ahead, the prospect of being rewarded, the opportunity to curry favour with the narcissistic leader, all means that they are going to have a diminution of their emotional empathy towards those individuals. Thus, whilst they don't create the toxic culture, they continue to perpetrate it. They engage in the frat behaviour that has been described in some of the early examples. They see nothing wrong with taunting people. It's just banter. They also engage in sexual harassment because their narcissistic traits come to the fore, emboldened by the nature of the culture, which is then encouraged by the narcissist or narcissists that lead the organisation, and thus they are emboldened. Accordingly, the culture comes from the leaders that are narcissists, but then gains acceptance and is perpetuated more often by normals within the workforce. The other aspect of buy-in is simply a failure by other individuals, also invariably normals and empathic people, to stand up to the culture. This, of course, is as a consequence of fear. Fear of being ridiculed, fear of being singled out, and ultimately fear of losing your job and losing your income. Accordingly, rather than speaking out about these behaviours, the individuals silently accept them. They don't like it, but they don't do anything necessarily to challenge it, and thus the culture prevails. It is set by the narcissist, it is perpetrated by a lack of action by those that don't like it, and is perpetrated by those that see a benefit in engaging in those behaviours because of their own reduced emotional empathy. Thus, this is how a toxic culture comes about. And there has been a very detailed example of this in relation to the Ministry of Defence in the United Kingdom. The Guardian reported that 60 women at the Ministry of Defence have complained of widespread toxic and hostile behaviour. 60 women at the UK's Ministry of Defence have described a hostile and toxic culture at the department in a letter that alleges sexual assault, lack of boundary recognition, lack of emotional empathy, manipulation, harassment, lack of emotional empathy, manipulation, and abuse, lack of emotional empathy, sense of entitlement, manipulation, by male colleagues. The letter seen by The Guardian was sent last month by a large group of senior civil servants to the Ministry of Defence's Permanent Secretary, alongside anonymised testimonies in which women described their personal experiences. The accounts included claims that women had been propositioned, groped and touched repeatedly, lack of emotional empathy, lack of boundary recognition, by male colleagues at the Ministry of Defence in a workplace culture the civil servants said was hostile to women as equal and respected partners. Now, it is not the case that all of these male colleagues will be narcissists. Some will be, but many will be normals who embrace this culture. Remember also, human beings are heavily influenced by a herd mentality, that it is better to go along with what the perceived majority is rather than standing against it. And normals are particularly susceptible to this herd mentality. In the letter, which is marked official sensitive, the group of senior civilian women said their day-to-day professional lives are made difficult thanks to behaviours that would be considered toxic and inappropriate in public life, but that are tolerated at the Ministry of Defence. We are spoken over during meetings, lack of boundary recognition. We are subject to pejorative language, lack of emotional empathy. We receive unwanted attention, sense of entitlement, lack of emotional empathy, and face sexual harassment, including intrusive staring, lack of boundary recognition, sexualised comments, sense of entitlement, running commentary about what we wear, sense of entitlement, how we look and how we smell, the group said. Testimonies included in the letter catalogue a list of alleged incidents at both the Ministry of Defence's headquarters in London and overseas bases. The accounts, the majority of which is described as very recent, suggest there is an abusive and discriminatory workplace culture at one of the UK government's largest departments. The accounts, which the letter said came from senior civilian women in operational and security roles, include A woman who said she was groped at a Ministry of Defence social function but was advised against complaining. A woman on an overseas posting who said she was touched repeatedly on the lower back and legs by a senior military officer, but the perpetrator went unpunished. The claim that a group of military officers kept an Excel spreadsheet that rated women based on their looks and what they thought they'd be like in bed. A woman who said that before an event in the evening, a defence senior asked a woman whether anal sex was an appropriate topic for his speech. An account of how a military officer propositioned a woman late at night in a corridor on an overseas military base. The testimonies, which are said to be the tip of the iceberg and illustrative of a current problem, not a historic one, where women describe being sick, feeling sick with fear, sobbing in the bathroom, and being subjected to intimidating, manipulative behaviour. According to the letter, attempts by women at the Ministry of Defence to speak out against the behaviour are generally minimised. Invalidation, rather than listened to. Poor listening, and it is common knowledge among women that the MOD's complaint system is not fit for purpose. As well as sexual harassment claims, the letter depicted a male-dominated work environment in which women were disrespected, outnumbered in meetings and overlooked for promotions, leading to what one woman said was a vicious cycle of men-only teams at the top of the MOD. The Guardian has seen a letter of response sent by the MOD's Permanent Secretary David Williams on the 5th of October. He wrote that he was disappointed and appalled by the testimonies and assured the women the issues raised were being taken seriously and will be acted on. Among the accounts of sexual harassment and inappropriate behaviour included in the letter, women said they'd felt uncomfortable and unsafe while working at the MOD's headquarters, known as Main Building, in Whitehall. The groups of men staring is horrible. Lack of boundary recognition, sense of entitlement, said one woman, describing her experience of walking through one of the building's main hallways. The constant objectification and harassment is appalling. Behaviours that are completely unacceptable on public transport, for example, are accepted in pockets of Main Building. According to another woman, a sexual advance from a senior military official had a lasting effect on her. It shattered my confidence, and, I hate having to say this, I couldn't help but question whether it was my fault. What is it about me that made this man think he could do this? The accounts were only a sample of an extraordinary amount of concerning experiences women at the Ministry of Defence had shared with the senior officials behind the document, the letter stated. The women said they wrote the letter after years of trying to improve cultures softly and diplomatically from within. According to one woman, a military officer told her there were only two kinds of women in defence, the bitches who were effective and the mumsy ones who were completely useless. One woman said that every woman who has left before me has put their decision to leave down to the culture here, and now she was leaving. It's a damning indictment, as well as a colossal waste of Ministry of Defence talent investment. Another woman said, I'm often the only woman in the room, and on almost all occasions men comment on what I wear, my fragrance, and if I'm wearing a skirt or dress. They've often remarked, you have legs. Some of the women reported offensive comments, insensitivity and a lack of support while pregnant. One woman said she became accustomed to being asked by men about her age, fertility, childbearing aspirations. The letter, which was also sent to a board-level Human Resources Committee, called for immediate action to change the department's policies and address the issues identified with its internal culture. Thus, the culture within this particular part of the Ministry of Defence is described as toxic and hostile. But where has it come from? It's evident that the leadership is failing in that, with regard to this particular culture, the attitudes that are put forward through a sense of entitlement, a lack of emotional empathy, a lack of accountability, etc., come from narcissists. Undoubtedly, narcissists occupy those high-up positions and therefore behave in the manner described or simply don't care that other people are behaving in this manner and intimidating female members of the Ministry of Defence. As I explained earlier, it is not all narcissists who will be engaging in this behaviour, but rather a collection of some narcissists at a lower level with normals who adopt that herd mentality, the laddish activity, that they don't see anything wrong with it, and because senior management don't do anything to punish it, and that their leadership either positively encourages such a view or does nothing to rein it in, results in the narcissist at the top polluting the work culture. There are, of course, certain narcissists that, because of the operation of a facade, will actually implement a positive culture and may well be behind the cultures that are described in the early part of this video with companies that have been praised. It doesn't mean just because there are narcissists at the top, it's always going to be a toxic culture. Your more evolved narcissist who recognize the value of a facade and have cognitive empathy to understand the behaviors that might be appropriate, and also have the ability to manipulate people in a benign way to get the best results, are more likely to create a positive culture. It also, of course, is the case that those positive cultures will be generated by those who are of a more empathic nature at the top of those organizations. What can be said is that where you have a toxic work culture, it will stem from the presence of one or more narcissists in a leadership position, because their worldview, seen through the distortion field of a sense of entitlement, a lack of emotional empathy, grandiosity, haughtiness, a lack of accountability, their necessity of the use of manipulations, means that they see people in a particular way so that they encourage toxic behaviors towards them and do nothing to rein them in. People that complain are a threat to control, and therefore that must be nullified. Rather than addressing their concerns, they're fired, they're ostracized, they're ridiculed. Man up, stop being such a baby, you need to grow a pair, it's just banter. They are dismissed because the narcissist has no emotional empathy and may not even have any cognitive empathy for them. The narcissist is focused on what matters to them, subconsciously, controlling people, and of course the residual benefit that could be provided through being more profitable. Thus people are expected to work longer, work off the books, etc., in order to fulfill the aims of the narcissist. What can you do if you find yourself within such a toxic work culture? Well, it very much depends on whether a culture is, say, department-wise, or if it is systemic. If it's department-wise, there are steps that you can take that are set out in my excellent package, How to Handle a Narcissist at Work, which gives you plenty of practical tips and advice with regard to dealing with one or more narcissists in your workplace where it's not a romantic entanglement. Where you face a systemic, cultural, toxic workplace, you simply have to go no contact with it. You yourself might be able to bring a lawsuit to recover compensation, but ultimately, you're not going to be able to overturn the toxic nature of that culture yourself, and therefore you must ensure that you withdraw from it. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.